Hi, this is Eileen Schumann with the Presbyterian Hunger Program, and I'm going to give a brief overview of land grabbing. Let's start with the definition. Land grabbing is the large-scale purchase or lease of land, mostly in developing countries, by large foreign and domestic investors, as well as governments, in which the land and its interconnected resources, soil, water, metals, minerals, fossil fuels, and forests are transferred from the control, use, and protection of local communities, primarily without their informed consent, to external investors. Taking a look at this graph, we get a sense of the global scale of these land deals. So 203 million hectares were approved or under negotiation. This is during the period of 2000 through 2011, and this includes those not yet possible to cross-reference. That's 503 million acres, or 8 times the size of the United Kingdom. So here we get a sense of the pace of these land grabs. So the 2007-2008 food price crisis, you can see on this graph, really caused a rush by investors for land in 2009. As you see, land acquisition spikes from 6.1 million hectares in 2008 all the way up to 29.9 million in 2009. So as pressures mount on productive land and natural resources in their own countries, governments, transnational corporations, and foreign investors are looking to secure food, water, energy, and factors of production abroad, as well as boost economic activity through development and tourism projects. And then here we can clearly see that over half of these land deals are happening in Africa. So this chart shows the top 10 land grab targets and investor countries. So on the left-hand side, you see the target countries, South Sudan coming in at the top, and on the right-hand side, you see the top investor countries, the United States being in the #1 slot at 8 million hectares grabbed, or that's 20 million acres. So what are the drivers of land grabbing? We have food importing countries who are particularly vulnerable to food price volatility, and with the detrimental food price spikes that came during the 2007-2008 food crisis, many of these countries decided to outsource domestic food production as a way to stabilize the prices of their food and ensure supplies. Ironically, such land grabs often happen in countries faced with their own food shortages. Let's take a look at this map. You see the maroon color indicates countries of origin of investors acquiring farmland overseas for food production. And then you see in the bright green countries that are targeted by these investors. Now pay attention to those yellow dots. Those indicate countries where over 10% of the population is undernourished. So you really can see a pattern in where people are grabbing land for their own food production in countries where there are malnourishment issues. And so if we just take a look at some of the land grabbing that is happening by Gulf states alone, for their food production for their own people. If you look at Ethiopia, 46% of the population is officially hungry. So Ethiopia is the 5th hungriest nation. 80% of the jobs in Ethiopia are in agriculture. We're talking about 13 million people. There's 15% of the population depends on food aid, and in 2013 the government had plans to lease 7.4 million acres out to foreign investors. So then there's agri-fuel production, which often people refer to as biofuel production as well. We're talking about ethanol, biodiesel. So as more countries are looking to secure their energy needs in response to the dwindling supplies and rising costs of fossil fuels, the demand for agri-fuels continues to increase globally, and more land is being grabbed from communities and deforested. So the primary agri-fuel feedstocks are corn, sugarcane, and soybean and palm oils. And looking at this pie chart, you can see clearly that biofuels is the primary driver of land grabbing that's happening today. And then there's the extractive industry. Global consumption of minerals, metals, and fossil fuels is an important driver of land and water grabbing. These extractive industries, these extractive resources are found in everything from our gas tanks, our electronics and jewelry, our wind and solar panels, our alternative forms of energy. And the average baby born in the U.S. today will consume 17 tons of minerals, metals, and fuels per year. So then there's also tourism development projects. In attempts to attract foreign investment and boost tourism, countries are privatizing ancestral lands that have served as homes, sources of livelihood, and cultural identity for generations, displacing indigenous communities and handing over control and ownership of natural resources to foreign corporations for the establishment of private resorts, hotels, restaurants, casinos, game reserves, and other tourist attractions. And we will hear that there are other development projects that are also contributing to land grab. We'll hear that from one of our other presenters. So what are the impacts, some of the impacts of land grabbing? So there's community displacement. Indigenous peoples and smallholder farmers, as well as pastoralists, are particularly vulnerable to land grabbing. This is because most do not possess officially recognized tenure titles, but rather live on the land under customary tenure agreements in which the state is technically the owner. Hence, they're at a disadvantage when it comes to bargaining power and are unable to defend their land claims. Consequently, they lose access to the land and its resources, their homes, their source of livelihoods, and the very foundation of their culture and way of life. So local community members are regularly left out of the information loops and decision-making processes of these land deals, which are usually conducted in secret. This lack of transparency ensures that the needs and goals of communities are excluded from consideration and consequently not met. As people lose access to their lands, they are no longer able to produce their own food and must consequently rely on the market and imported food to meet their sustenance needs, subjecting them to risks of food price volatility and food insecurity. Furthermore, small farmers become disempowered as they are transformed into field laborers working for poverty wages. Now that's if they actually get jobs. So impoverished local people frequently end up living like indentured servants on their own land, working for minimal pay, producing food for export rather than household consumption. So of course this leads to increased poverty and hunger. So these land deals are frequently made without conducting social and environmental impact assessments. The impact on the environment is often severe. Typically we see deforestation, erosion, the destruction of biodiversity. And these land deals also involve the grabbing of water. Modern extractive technologies are increasingly using greater amounts of water in extraction and processing, depleting, diverting, and polluting water resources in the soil, with widespread implications for the environment and public health. Additionally, large-scale monoculture agriculture often requires massive amounts of water for irrigation and chemical inputs which contaminate the air, soil, and water. But it's not all doom and gloom. Fortunately, people are fighting back and are having successes. So we're going to hear from some presenters that are going to give us some cases from different parts of the world where, give us some information on people's struggles there. So first up we have Stephen Bartlett with Agricultural Missions, one of PHP's ecumenical partners.
And we are an ecumenical organization that accompanies in solidarity people's movements of the land. And we're also co-founders of the U.S. Food Sovereignty Alliance. I'd like to mention just up front, after that very good introduction by Eileen, that many of the social movements we work with have analyzed land grabbing as one aspect of the financialization of the world economy and the importance of speculative capital. In other words, there's a lot of money looking for investments, and right now the investment climate is very poor in many areas. So the money is now going toward what looks like the best investment, which is the real thing, the land and the resources. And that's why land grabs, along with extractive industries, mega tourism, etc., are becoming intensified in their pressures on land. I'd like to talk about Honduras as a case example, and if in that sense land grabs are not new. We had the United Fruit Company coming in the early part of the 20th century and taking over a lot of the prime land. Today you have Dole Company that has a lot of good land in Honduras, etc. What we had in the late in the 2000s in Honduras was this social movement to get more and more traction, and the President Zelaya was responding to those demands, and a lot of the demands had to do with land conflicts all over Honduras. There are many landless people in Honduras, and as a result there were many land reform efforts and negotiations that were ongoing across Honduras, and some of the instigators of its coup d'etat against Zelaya were the largest landowners of Honduras, who felt threatened by the agrarian reform agenda. The coup, however, has galvanized the social movements of Honduras, and but it has intensified and made more violent the repression of farmers and rural peoples trying to get land. As Eileen mentioned, the driving economic forces on Honduras are agri-fuels. We call it agri-fuels, so that biofuel seems to be a very favorable connotation, using the word biology. This is really an agricultural issue, so we say agri-fuels. That African palm trees are just taking over vast areas of Honduras to produce biodiesel. In the case of the coastal peoples, the Garifuna with whom we partner, the mega tourism is a threat, as well as other agricultural land invasions. I'd like to talk about the ways that these social movements are resisting and working against the extractive and land grab agenda. One of our partners who we've been working with for the last more than 20 years, Ofrane, the Afro-Indigenous for the Garifuna peoples, live in about 40 communities on the north shore of Honduras. They've been there for more than 200 years. They speak indigenous languages and have a deep African and Afro-Indigenous culture. They are up against a lot of megatourism infringements on their land, but at the same time, with very good leadership, they've been able to recover land, and most recently we accompanied them in a process of recovering 2,500 acres of land in a place called Vallecito, where the leadership of the Garifuna hoped to settle Garifuna who are otherwise displaced from some of the coastal communities that are being infringed upon by land grabs and also being harmed by climate change and the rising of the ocean in the coastal areas. Well, how did they do this? First, they prepared an international network of people in communication about what they were going to do, and then they occupied the land which they had title to, legal title to. This land, however, had been occupied by a narco-trafficker and taken over much of the best land from them. So in 2012, in the summer, they started an occupation and demanded a resurveying of the land, and with international solidarity and a lot of pressure on the Honduran government, they were able to resurvey the land. And then last March, we joined with the Garifuna and other indigenous peoples from around Honduras to consolidate that land recovery in Vallecito. And the indigenous peoples together, working together with a common agenda, had an assembly, and we had an international seminar conference on agriculture, culture, and land and sustainability. That's one example, and they were able to do it without any violence against them, partly because their ancestors protect them, and to a great degree because of the great solidarity within Honduras and internationally that was able to be applied. Another example of resistance to land grabs is the Lenca people of the central mountains of Honduras. The Lenca people have been, for the last 20 years or so, have been organizing in a tremendous way to gain territorial control of their traditional indigenous territories, and in 3 departments of Honduras near the Salvadoran border. And but recently, the government, with this new coup government, have opened up a flood of concessions for mining. And one of them was for a hydroelectric power plant to be built in their pristine territory called Rio Blanco, where they decided they were going to draw the line this time. They've been fighting these mega projects for quite a while. In this case, they were able to block the road to supply the machinery to build the mega dam, the hydroelectric dam, and that has been successful, and but at the cost of where now palm.
Stephen? Hey, Stephen?
Yes.
I think we're losing your audio a little bit.
Okay.
Oh, okay. That's better.
Issues there are people on peasant military violence. There's a large landowner, the largest landowner of Honduras, called Miguel Facuse, who has taken over lots of people's lands, and as they've been fighting against those land grabs, they have been killed. And this was an international gathering of human rights in Aguan in April 2012, I guess it was. Rio Blanco, the Copin people, the Lenca people, have been criminalized. The block has the hydroelectric dam. to survey the land and to prove that the land was owned by the Garifuna. Has been tremendous, and I would say also Copine and Ofrane both are leaders in the movement as a whole, and have been in the kind of in the hot spot. They've been working tremendously to build the social movement's pressure against the impunity, against the extraction, against the greed and blatant, thievery of the corporate, not the corporate, oligarchy and the corporate entities that have taken advantage of the vacuum of democratic space in Honduras. I think I may be up, my time may be up, so I'd love to stop here and maybe we can discuss a little bit more during the Q&A time.
Actually, Stephen, if I could jump in for just a second, this is Jessica. We had a question about wanting to know if you know of Sudanese organizations working on issues of land grab in South Sudan. I'm not sure if you would have that information, or maybe someone else online could speak to that. I've heard
quite a bit about the land grabbing in Sudan, especially just after the recent independence of Sudan. I've heard that the first big land grab effort was stopped, but I know that there are others in the way. I think Oakland Institute, if people want to, they would probably get more information by going to the oaklandinstitute.org, because they're doing a lot of research on land grabs.
We have our partners from Church World Service. Fionnuala Cregan is here. And she is going to give us some information on the work that's going on in the Chaco region, which is work that the Presbyterian Hunger Program has been supporting for a number of years.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
So my name is Fionnuala Cregan. And I work for Church World Service. I'm based in the regional Latin American Caribbean office, which is based in Buenos Aires in Argentina. And I'm the representative for our work in the South America. The presentation I prepared for today will give a brief overview of the South American Chaco as a region that's kind of a little heard of region in terms of global processes and politics. So I wanted to introduce you to this fascinating region, and then give you some examples of cases of land grabbing where communities have fought back, and in one case where a community has won its case and been able to move back onto its land. And then provide a little bit of information about what the Church World Service Chaco program is doing and how it's contributing to the processes of strengthening communities in their ability to resist land grabbing. So you can see here the South American Chaco is an area equivalent in size to Egypt or Colombia. Oh, sorry. It's the second largest dry forest in the world. Oh, it's the largest dry forest in the world, and it's the second largest forest in Latin America after the Amazon. And as you can see on the map there, it spans the border edges of 3 countries. That's Argentina, Bolivia, and Paraguay. But it's also a region that's relatively isolated. It's not near the capitals of any of those 3 countries, and that isolation contributes to a sense of weak governance and of impunity for companies to move in and grab land and violate human rights. It's a region of great cultural diversity. It's actually the most diverse region in the whole of Latin America. It's home to 25 different indigenous ethnic groups who lived up until the 1700s as semi-nomadic hunter-gatherers, and then with the colonization process began to lose most of their land. It's a region with high levels of poverty and inequality. In some parts of the Chaco region, 70% of the population are denied their basic rights. That's the right to housing, to safe water, food, and education. In some communities where Church World Service works, 80% of the children under 5 suffer from malnutrition. And an example of the inequality faced by indigenous communities in some countries, 51% of indigenous communities So one of the major challenges in the South American Chaco region at the moment is the advance of the agricultural frontier, particularly in Argentina and Paraguay. And this is for the soya and cattle industries. The rate of deforestation is on average of 2,417 acres a day, which is the equivalent of 1,000 football pitches. So deforestation is happening at a very, very alarming rate. The perpetrators of this deforestation are largely cattle ranchers, as well as medium to large agro-fuel companies who are planting soya for export. And there's also hardwood industry companies who are cutting down. There's very good quality hardwood called quebracho trees, which are unique to the Chaco region. As I mentioned earlier, the Chaco is a region of huge cultural diversity, and this is recognized in the constitutions of all three countries of Argentina, Bolivia, and Paraguay, which recognize that indigenous people have a special right to their ancestral lands as the pre-inhabitants of each of those countries. And so that's a constitutional right that the indigenous people have fought and won for in the early 90s in these three countries. And using this constitutional right, many indigenous communities have won legal title to small pockets of their ancestral land. And this means that that land can't be sold or transferred. So I mentioned earlier about who's grabbing land in the Chaco. So it's the wood industry, the cattle ranching, and agribusiness. And there's a photo there of one of the loggers removing vast amounts of quebracho trees from the Chaco. The impact of land grabs, I think Eileen mentioned that quite clearly at the beginning of her presentation, and just a little word here on what that means for indigenous communities who lose their land. They're evicted from their land. Most of them are forced to go and live in urban centres, which has a huge impact on their identity as indigenous people. Their identity is very much related to the land. In the land they have their traditional medicines and materials for handicrafts, as an example. And then, as Eileen mentioned, another impact of land grabs is increased deforestation and damage to some of the few remaining important ecosystems in the world. A case study of a land grab in Argentina. This is an indigenous ethnic group called the Mocovi, who had won a legal battle to get title to their land. They have 12,355 acres. And then an agro-industrial company moved in called Bajo Agoondro. This was in collusion with a local judge who forged papers handing this piece of land to a private company and tricking members of this indigenous community to sign papers that they did not even understand, that they were not translated to the Mocovi language, and there were essentially a few of the leaders were tricked into signing papers, and the judge transferred the title to Bajo Agoondro. But as mentioned at the beginning, once an indigenous community has got legal land, it can never be sold or transferred. So what happens in this community called Raíz Chaqueña was clearly in violation of provincial laws in Argentina, but also national laws and the constitutional right of indigenous people. Luckily, this is a community which is aware of its rights, and they, with support from organizations in the Chaco region, began to initiate legal proceedings against the private company Bajo Agoondro. This took years of a legal process, and in September 2013, just a few months ago, a civil court in the province of Chaco ordered the return of the land to the Mocovi indigenous community, and the company was given 15 days to leave the premises. This is seen as a landmark case in Argentina. It's the first time that an indigenous community has won its case in terms of land grabbing, and where both national law in Argentina was applied, but also international law was used in terms of justifying the rights of indigenous people to their ancestral lands. Another example is from the Paraguayan Chaco, and this is territory belonging to a group called Ayoreo, which are quite unique tribe in the South American Chaco because a number of them continue to live in voluntary isolation. So there are tribes that still have not had any contact with the outside world. In July, and some of them do live in, who are in contact with this Paraguayan society, and they work to protect those IRA who continue to choose to live in voluntary isolation. And so their IRA colleagues work to protect them, and they have also won portions, legal title to portions of their ancestral land. In July last year, a huge tract of this land was usurped by a wood company, and again, interestingly, this was in collusion with a local judge who signed papers giving the company access to that land. Very rapidly, the company moved in and carried out huge amounts of deforestation, removing a tree called Palo Santo and fencing off the land. And for uncontacted tribes, this is particularly dangerous because if they have not had contact with the outside world and suddenly find the place they're in, it puts their very existence in danger. There was a huge mobilization in the Paraguayan Chaco. There was solidarity from other indigenous communities in the region, and they blocked a major highway to protest against this case of land grabbing. And they gained such widespread national attention to the cause that the judge was forced to reverse the resolution in which he'd originally granted the land to a private company, and he ordered the company to leave. Unfortunately, the company has not yet left, and despite ongoing pressure from indigenous communities and local organizations, they have not managed to completely evict this private company from IRA land. So one of the questions that were mentioned at the beginning, how are local people fighting back? So I'll just give you two of how people have fought back. On one hand, through legal proceedings, so we call it strategic litigation, where you identify a concrete case where the law has been violated and you initiate legal proceedings based on provincial laws, national laws, and even international law to which recognizes the rights. We have the example there from the Argentinian Chaco of how this strategic litigation can be successful. And then on the other hand, the example from Paraguay, where communities knew about their rights and they knew that it was wrong that the company was coming in onto land that was owned by the IRA of people, and they came out to defend their indigenous colleagues, and they blocked a major highway for a number of days until the government responded. So another important process is to strengthen communities, make them aware of their right to land, and so that they have the tools then to defend lands that they already own. And in the extreme case, when they lose that land, they can come out and demand their rights and organize mobilizations. International support, it also plays a major role in preventing land grabs, because you've seen at the beginning in Eileen's presentation, a lot of land grabs is faced by international companies or not, so it's sometimes more difficult to use national laws in this context. And in addition, a lot of the litigation work, for example, the case from the Argentinian Chaco, is funded by international cooperation, because national governments aren't going to fund local organizations to initiate legal proceedings when there's been government collusion in a land grab. So a lot of the litigation work is funded by organizations like Church World Service and the Presbyterian Hunger Project. And then a second way in which there's been international support has been through, in Latin America, for example, the Inter-American Court for Human Rights has heard a number of cases of land grabs and has ordered governments to return land to the communities. And then just a little bit of an overview of the work that Church World Service is doing in the Chaco. As mentioned, this is the Church World Service Chaco program has also been funded by the Presbyterian Hunger Project since its initiation in 2005. And it's a program that works on 4 key areas. On one hand, it's the recovery of ancestral land by indigenous communities and its sustainable use. So this as a way of reducing the poverty and inequality and hunger that indigenous communities face, as I mentioned at the beginning. And then secondly, it works strengthening indigenous organizations. So if indigenous people know more about their rights and they feel empowered, they will come out and defend their rights. And we look also at vulnerable groups within that, in the empowerment of women and youth in particular. And then the fourth area that the program works is on public policy influence and bringing about lobbying, carrying out advocacy for laws and legislation in the Chaco to ensure that people's rights are respected and to improve the quality of life of people who for so many decades have lived in conditions of exclusion. So the achievements of the program, the indigenous communities have recovered 1,788 square miles of territory, which is equivalent in size to Trinidad and Tobago. Indigenous youth have been empowered and have received support for their education to carry out the third level education, and many of those young people who we've worked with in 9 years are now working in both in the legal system and in the education system and providing role models for other indigenous young people. And then the leadership training and making the awareness of rights process has led to leaders being able to demand their rights and manage their own land claims with greater autonomy. With an evaluation of the program carried out in 2012, and more information on the achievements and on the program itself can be found there on our website that you can see on the link there.
We have next Jeff Napoleon Baminjo. He's the coordinator of our Joining Hands Network, LUFA in Cameroon.
Yeah, good day everybody. I hope it is better now.
Yeah, great. We hear you great now, Jeff.
Okay. Greetings from Cameroon. As Eileen says, my name is Jeff Baminjo. I am the coordinator of the LUFA, Network for the Fight Against Hunger, Joining Hands partner in Cameroon. I'm very glad to share our perspectives on this issue of land grabbing in Cameroon. And from the previous presentations, it is very clear that land grabbing is a concern, and the problems are very similar. Therefore, it is an ill that should be resisted. So there's need for concerted action both at the national and also the international level. Let me first of all just quickly situate the context in Cameroon. Looking precisely at the land tenure system. The land tenure system in Cameroon, the land tenure system in Cameroon, the land tenure system in Cameroon is actually the legacy of the colonial administration. Cameroon was colonized by both Germany, Britain, and also France. And because of this, the colonial administration actually made the registration of land a condition to own land. Therefore, unlike before the colonization, land ownership is based on registration. Therefore, anybody entitled to land must have a land title. That is a problem. And therefore, as a result, local communities are not always involved in negotiations for land acquisition. Therefore, this is actually a problem. And it continued right up to the period that we had our independence in 1960. And the Cameroon land law actually dates back to 1974, which is very, very old. There needs to be reforms for this land law to protect customary land ownership. And also, public policies on land have not actually helped the situation because there is so much focus on foreign direct investment based on inviting agro-industrial companies to come and invest. And the structural adjustment policies of the country that the country adopted right back in the 1980s actually contributed to this because there is so much shift on focusing on foreign direct investment through agro-industries. Therefore, the state systematically phased out of supporting agriculture, and it is paradoxical. 70% of the population in Cameroon depends on agriculture for their livelihood, and therefore, without proper investment, it is a problem. That is why most often now Cameroon is importing some of the things for it can actually produce locally because of this phase out and also overemphasis on foreign direct investment. Now, there is some data. There is some data on land ownership. some data on land ownership in Cameroon, and I just want to give some figures based on the figures we have in 2014. But I'll also say these figures are just indicative because land deals are always threaded with lots of secrecy. Therefore, it is very difficult to have exactly the right data. But from most of the reports that exist, over 2 million hectares of land is currently being demanded by foreign corporations in Cameroon. And you see some of the figures which are just indicated. The situation is actually quite alarming. But to properly look at the situation in Cameroon, are one case, which is the Heracles Farms. This is a New York-based agro-industry that signed a convention with the government of Cameroon asking for 73,000 hectares of land. The problem with this project is that the scale, the duration, and even the land rents that is proposed is quite telling, because the company wants to exploit the land for 99 years and paying very low land rates, about 50 cents per hectare per year. And if the project goes ahead, if they are developing the land, they pay just $1 per hectare per year. But it is contrary to what local communities actually pay, because they pay more than $200 per hectare per year. This is an example of the project site. This is a photo from Greenpeace, which was taken from the air. It shows a nursery of the oil palm project for Greenpeace. Now, why is this project so controversial? It had a lot of inconsistencies because the convention was signed by a minister, but the Cameroon land law provides that any concession above 50 hectares should be signed by the President of the Republic, so that was a problem. It is also located in a very bad zone. It is located in a buffer zone with so many conservation projects. So the project actually squeezes a population of around 14,000 people. This figure is just very conservative because most of the figures are talking about 22,000 people living in a concession area. And this was the only land that is left for them for agriculture and also to cultivate and produce non-timber forest products. And there was no free prior informed consent of the local communities. So it was a problem. And this project has a lot of negative impact on the local population. And I'll just take just one. Coming back to the land rent, which I said was very low, within the concession. For instance, there are cuckoo farmers, because this is a source, it's a cash crop, and it's a source of income for the people. Somebody with a cuckoo farm can have like $1,000 if he cultivates like maybe 4 hectares per year. And this is the same land that is taken and given to a company that is going to pay as low as $1 per hectare per year. It is basically converting the local entrepreneurs to plantation laborers, because most of the communication was talking about the positive impacts of the project in terms of employment. Because of this, RELUFA, the Network for the Fight Against Hunger, with the partner organization Center for Environment and Development, conducted a study to look at the inconsistencies of this project. And the results were quite telling. And because of this, the advocacy campaign was used to reveal the inconsistencies. Now, there is so much focus on promoting foreign agro-industrial companies. And this is a picture of an artisanal palm oil production in Cameroon. But there is little support for these people. This can be a good alternative to support them instead of supporting large multinationals. And also this picture also shows a banana plantation in Cameroon. The problem is that most of this land is near the habitation of people. Therefore, to get land to do farming, which is the source of their living, they have to travel far distances to work their farms. So this also creates problems for the local communities. And coming back to the Heracles Farms project, there was a lot of mobilization and resistance from the local communities with respect to the project. I earlier mentioned the study that RELUFA made, and also in collaboration with local communities to engage a campaign, which was actually supported by also national and international civil society organizations. Because of this campaign, there were small victories. Because back in 2013, around December, the President of the Republic of Cameroon signed a decree revising this convention, actually reducing the scale, reducing the duration, and also increasing the rents. We call these small victories. And this is an example of non-timber forest product because people also harvest them from the forest to sell and have their money. So this is called bush mango. And if the project goes ahead, these people are going to lose this non-timber forest product, which gives them cash and enough revenue. And upon all this, what are we saying? Although there's been small changes with respect to the victories I just mentioned, our position remains the same. This is a bad project. Instead of supporting foreign agro-industries, it is good to invest in local small-scale agriculture because land is the only wealth that these small farmers have. And then there is also a need for clear territorial planning and clear land management system in Cameroon because any investor comes, he's just accorded land without proper planning. And most of the land that is always taken away is that of the local communities. And also in Cameroon, customary land ownership is not formally protected by the law in the legislation. Therefore, this is also one thing we are recommending, that there should be customary land ownership protected by the law. Civil society also needs to continuously build the capacities of local communities to actually stand and protect their rights. And also, very, very important, there should be pressure on multilateral development banks like the World Bank to stop funding land grab because they support this land grab in the name of agro-business. Now, all these campaigns were undertaken with lots and lots of hardships. There was a lot of intimidation from the company and also the local administration. This is the picture of a local activist who was very instrumental in standing against this Heracles project. And actually the company introduced a lawsuit against him. To us, we think this is just a form of intimidation to force him to stay quiet. Equally, the local administration banned the activities of one other organization, which is called Nature Cameroon, just because they were articulating the concerns of the local communities with respect to this Heracles Farms project. Now, what actions do we actually envisage? We want to continue to stand beside this local activist called Nasakfo Bisengi, who heads a local civil society organization. We want the company to drop the lawsuit against him, and also for the activities of Nature Cameroon, to uplift the ban that is on them. Relief and CED, as the Center for Environment and Development, also introduced what we call the OECD complaint, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, to the national contact point in the United States of America, since this is an American company, actually asking the national contact point to do an investigation into the activities of this Heracles Farm because there are allegations that they use corruption and bribes to find their way. So the negotiation is going to start, and we are waiting for what is going to obtain. In all, we are agreed that land grabbing is a negative phenomenon which must be resisted. It is always very, very easy in this world to forget or ignore the poor people and also the local communities. Therefore, social justice campaigners like us, we need to stand firm against land grab. I think I was not above time. I will end there and maybe receive any questions that you may want to ask about the situation in Cameroon. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jeff. So now we can receive questions from anybody, and you can make questions to any one of our panelists, or you can present just questions in general.
I'd like to jump in here. We have two questions already. Both of them are directed towards Stephen, but if anyone else on the panel can address them as well, feel free. The first question is from mission coworker Cindy Carell in Haiti, and she is wondering, Stephen, if you can speak to any land grabbing that's going on in Haiti right now. And
thank you, Cindy Carell from Port-au-Prince. Yes, I think what I'm aware of most now is the very aggressive action of mining companies moving into various areas: gold mining, silver mining, copper mining. I think the mining threat is very big, and I think at the last big gathering in Haiti, the peasant movements back in March, the presentation by activists from the Dominican Republic who have been fighting some of the same mining companies that have been exploiting areas of the Dominican Republic. I think the Haitian peasant movements were very much galvanized around resisting the entry of these mines. The other thing is the so-called free trade, well, they're called industrial zones or zona francas that have been proposed by the government together with the Clintons, proposing this idea of solving the unemployment problem of Haiti by creating industrial parks. And there was one that's been created up in the northeast of Haiti called Caracol, in which prime agricultural land, about 180 hectares, were taken from farming communities without consulting them and used to turn into a sweatshop zone, basically, where foreign companies producing very cheap clothing can get cheap labor force of Haitians to raise their profit margin. So, the other aspect about land in Haiti is that they desperately need an agrarian reform law, and that's a long-term project of the peasant movements to create an agrarian reform law so that those farmers would have recourse and would have rights, land rights, greater than what we have today, where the government is pretty much, like many other governments, is selling off the land, selling off the minerals, selling off the resources of the country just for a quick dollar, and not with no regard for the welfare of the majority of people who in Haiti, like in Cameroon, 67% of Haitians are still rural and rely on agriculture for their employment and for their livelihood.
There's another question for Jaff, and the sign on the last slide for Heracles Farms makes it all sound so quote-unquote green, and David is wanting to know what the All Africa partnership that's referenced on the sign, if you could say anything about that.
Yes, basically it is not as green as it looks. Just to remind you, David, All for Africa is an NGO, actually, that was created by this company to sort of like help in tree planting. This is basically what they were doing. And to us, this was like just trying to greenwash themselves. But I don't think they are as green as it seems to look in the picture.
Okay. There's another question for Stephen. And Stephen, I sent this to you in the chat box because it's a little bit long. But Adam says, with respect to Afro-Caribbean coastal peoples and tourism development, where globalization and tourism often arrived several decades ago, how does one approach advocacy where local communities have already been forced to give up sustainable lifestyles and accepted individual property rights regimes and have often sold their own land in order to adapt to the twin forces of poverty and globalizing forces of tourism?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. What's interesting and very important about the indigenous and the Afro-Indigenous, in this case Garifuna communities of Honduras, is that they are protected theoretically under a United Nations convention called Convention 169 of the International Labor Organization, which requires basically for anyone to come into a community, to that territory that's designated for those indigenous peoples, requires their consent as a collective. It also allows them to hold their land, very important, to hold their land with collective titles, not individual titles. And one of the big breaches is that local judges have been allowing people to sell land within these collective territories as individuals, which is illegal, actually. And so the Garifuna have been pushing very hard to say, look, if you're Garifuna and you want to sell your house, you can only sell it to another Garifuna person because this is in Garifuna territory. So the fact that they're holding these territories as collective territories is a key element. It's not being observed, but it's the foundation for their defense of their communities, and it's kind of the draw line of conflict right there, saying this is collective land. You cannot buy us out one by one. We won't agree to leave unless we all agree, and we're not going to agree to leave. But I should also say that the cultural restoration, as the comment, you know, a lot of Garifunos have left, have gone to the Bronx and New Orleans and Miami. They are sending money back to their relatives in the Garifuna communities. But the Garifunas are determined to hold on to their culture. And so through arts, through music, through the ritual ceremonies that they enact, they are really holding very strong to their culture, and they are really an inspiration to the other indigenous people of Honduras, the extent to which they've used their culture as a place of great power for them. There are projects if people want to be involved. We would love to support more radio stations, the community radio stations that the Garifuna run, also the case in the Lenca communities. But these community radio is very important for them to put them online so that the communities in the Bronx can be listening to the town councils, the town meetings, the town social and cultural events, so they feel a sense of ownership, being part of their home village, hometown. There's a lot that can be done, and we just need more people to sort of step up and do a little something that can make a big difference for strengthening the restoration and the preservation of the culture.
All right. Well, thanks to everybody for your questions. We unfortunately are out of time, and we want to respect everybody's time commitments since we scheduled just an hour for this. And we have everyone who attended. We have your emails, and the Presbyterian Hunger Program is formatting right now a fact sheet that we've produced with case studies from some of our partners that's on land grab. So we will, once that is completed and in a PDF format, we will share that with all of you. And thank you to all of our presenters today. We appreciate your doing this for us, and thanks to everybody for your participation.